The cities Jesus traveled through were not what most people picture. Set aside the gleaming white marble boulevards of Hollywood Bible films. Set aside the spotless stone courtyards and robed figures drifting across open spaces in gentle morning light. The real streets of first-century Judea were cramped dirt passages barely wide enough for two people to squeeze past, thick with dust, animal waste, and dirty water trickling down the middle. The air was heavy with smoke, with sweat, with crowded bodies and decaying vegetables. This was not a scenic setting for a narrative. This was an environment of pure survival. And everything Jesus spoke, every parable he shared, every confrontation he sparked, it was forged in these streets, shaped by this grit, and received by people whose bodies bore the marks of this world. Every single day. Begin with the ground under your feet. What locals called streets were uneven, tamped earth trails, seldom wider than 2 meters. Sidewalks were non-existent. A routine walk to the market turned into a physical battle for space between pedestrians, donkeys hauling grain, and the occasional Roman patrol that pressed everyone flat against the walls. The design was not random. It was defensive. Houses presented bare walls toward the alley, windowless, fortress-like. The street was recognized as a zone of danger. True life took place behind those walls, inside the courtyards, hidden from the eyes of outsiders and soldiers. But the walls were thin. Mud brick and rough stone packed together to conserve material carried every sound. In a village like Nazareth or Capernaum, you heard your neighbor's quarrels, an infant crying through the wall, the steady grinding of grain from the adjacent house. Privacy was a notion that simply did not exist. The community functioned as a single organism. Everyone was aware of what everyone else was doing. Life played out under constant auditory observation. Not from officials, but from the clan. Follow those alleys far enough, and they opened into a clearing that struck you before you saw it. The marketplace. The souk was not a pleasant shopping outing. It was a daily barrage of noise, odor, worry, and haggling. Sellers yelled over one another from stone slabs and wooden booths crammed so tightly that 2 buyers could not stand side by side. Fish from the Sea of Galilee, dried, salted, or fresh enough to still be stiffening, sat in piles next to heaps of grain. Clay vessels of olive oil, bundles of coarse flax, and baskets of figs already darkening in the heat. The smell was complex and unavoidable. Fermented fish sauce, spoiled oil from a cracked vessel, raw onion and garlic, animal dung dragged in from the street, the acidic sweat of bodies jammed together. Flies blanketed everything. Dogs prowled the edges, darting for scraps. Everything went bad quickly. There was no refrigeration, no preservation beyond salt and sun-drying. Bread purchased in the morning could be stale by noon. Fruit went soft within hours. Meat, when anyone could afford it, had to be consumed the same day or forfeited entirely. And the prices shifted without notice. A drought, a disrupted caravan, a Roman seizure of grain for the garrison could double the price of barley overnight. The cost of bread was not an economic figure, it was a daily dread. Every family in that market was running the same calculation. What can we afford today? And will it hold until tomorrow? A laborer earned 1 denarius per day, enough for bread, a handful of lentils, a few olives. 1 missed day of work drove a family toward hunger. 2 missed days drove toward borrowing at rates that could consume a household. Scales were unreliable. Merchants clipped coins. Arguments erupted constantly. Voices rising, hands waving, neighbors drawn in as witnesses. The market was where poverty was most exposed, most loud, and most degrading. Where a man who could not afford a full portion of grain had to turn away empty-handed in front of everyone he knew. Leave the market and enter a typical home. The first thing you noticed was not the space, it was the objects. A first-century dwelling in Galilee was not mainly a living room. It was a workshop, a storehouse, and a survival stockpile, compressed into roughly 40 to 60 square meters for an entire family. Against one wall, a hand mill, 2 flat basalt stones, the upper one rotated by hand, where a woman crushed grain every morning. The rhythmic scraping audible through every wall in the alley. The flour dropped into a clay bowl placed below, ready for the flatbread that would be cooked on a stone slab over a dung and wood fire built on the packed earth floor. The smoke had no escape. It rose and clung to the ceiling, to the walls, to the clothing, to the hair of everyone inside. Eyes burned, lungs adapted, or they didn't. Along the opposite wall, large clay storage jars, some waist-high, contained the household's vital reserves: olive oil, wine, water, dried lentils, barley. Every jar stood for weeks of labor and could not be replaced quickly if it cracked or was stolen. Smaller containers held salt, dried herbs, and the valuable fish sauce that seasoned almost everything. A shelf carved into the stone wall might hold a family's entire portable wealth. A few coins wrapped in cloth tucked inside a jar of grain. A second tunic folded and kept in a recess. An iron tool, a saw, an adze. A sickle worth more than anything else in the house. Iron was costly. Losing a tool could cripple a family's ability to work for weeks until a replacement was forged or borrowed. In fishing villages like Capernaum, nets hung from wall hooks or lay stretched across the floor being mended, the sharp smell of tarred rope blending with smoke and cooking oil. Baskets were woven in the corner. Torn clothing was patched by the faint light of a clay oil lamp. In carpenter households, wood shavings blanketed the floor, and the scent of freshly cut timber mixed with everything else. The home was not a place of rest. It was a place of relentless, repetitive toil, where every surface had a function, and every object was too precious to ignore. When Jesus told the parable of a woman who lost a single coin and swept the whole house to recover it, his listeners did not hear a quaint story. They heard desperation. In a house that dim, that cluttered, that filled with essential objects, losing 1 drachma, a day's pay, could mean searching for hours on hands and knees in the dirt. Water controlled everything, and it was never certain. In Jerusalem, a system of channels and aqueducts supplied public cisterns and pools. But in the hill towns of Galilee, families relied almost entirely on rain. Rooftops were built not just for living space, but for collection. The flat, packed mud surface directed rainwater into shallow grooves cut along the edges, which drained through stone pipes into underground cisterns hewn from the limestone beneath the house. The size of your cistern determined how deep into the dry season your family could last. A solid winter of heavy rains could fill a cistern for months. A dry year, and dry years were common, meant rationing every cup from March onward. Women hauled clay jars to communal springs or wells, sometimes walking a kilometer or more each direction. Jars that weighed 20 kilograms when full, balanced on the head or pressed against the hip, repeated twice or 3 times a day. The journey consumed hours. In summer, when the wadis dried and the cistern levels sank below the reach of a rope and bucket, the daily water trip became longer, slower, and more perilous. Conflicts over access to a dwindling spring were not metaphors. They were real, and the water itself was not clean. Stagnant cistern water bred mosquito larvae and gathered dust and debris that washed from the roof. Animal contamination was constant in shared sources. Gastrointestinal disease was widespread. Diarrhea claimed more children than any war. People understood from experience that bad water could kill, especially the young and the elderly. But they had no knowledge of bacteria or contamination in the modern sense. They simply knew some water was safe and some water meant death, and the boundary between them was invisible. The ritual immersion pools, mikvaot, that archaeologists have uncovered in vast numbers across Jerusalem and Judea functioned on a completely different principle. They were not about hygiene. They were about spiritual standing. You could drink tainted cistern water and become gravely ill. But if you immersed in a ritually valid pool before entering the temple courts, you were pure before God. Physical sickness and spiritual purity existed in separate categories. The system was strict, daily, and non-negotiable. Now step back, because the world Jesus lived in was not one kind of place. It was a patchwork of radically different cities, each with its own tempo, scent, economy, and anxiety. Jerusalem was the gravitational center, a temple city where everything orbited around the enormous sanctuary complex Herod had spent decades constructing. The platform alone spanned 36 acres. Some foundation stones weighed over 500 tons. The walls rose so high that Josephus recorded, "A person gazing down from the summit would become dizzy." The interior courts were organized by access. The court of the Gentiles outermost, then the court of women, then the court of Israel, then the court of the priests, and finally, the Holy of Holies, entered by one man once a year. The entire edifice was a theology rendered in stone. The nearer you came to God, the fewer people were permitted. During the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Jerusalem's population surged from roughly 40,000 to several hundred thousand. The odor of animal sacrifice, blood, burning fat, incense hovered over the city for weeks. Merchants lined every approach road. Pilgrims camped on every hillside, and the friction between Roman soldiers stationed on the Antonia fortress overlooking the temple courts and the Jewish throngs packed below was constant, visible, and primed to erupt at any provocation. Jericho was something else entirely. A commercial oasis situated at the lowest point on earth, fed by springs that turned the surrounding desert green with date palms and balsam groves. The balsam trade alone made Jericho prosperous. The resin was used for perfume, medicine, and religious anointing across the Mediterranean, and its price per weight matched silver. Herod had constructed a winter palace complex there with swimming pools, gardens, banquet halls, and a hippodrome. Tax collectors flourished in Jericho because it sat on a vital trade route linking the Jordan Valley to Jerusalem. Every merchant, every pilgrim, every caravan transporting goods east or west passed through customs. When Luke describes Zacchaeus as a chief tax collector in Jericho, the detail is not coincidental. Jericho was one of the most lucrative taxation posts in the entire region. The city smelled of ripe fruit, of spice, of money. It was everything a Galilean fishing village was not. Sepphoris, barely an hour's walk from Nazareth, was the jolt of collision. A regional capital being reconstructed by Herod Antipas with Roman architecture, paved streets, a theater seating 4,000, mosaic floors, colonnaded avenues. A carpenter from Nazareth could rise in a stone room reeking of goats, walk 6 kilometers, and find himself facing marble columns. Scholars believe Joseph and Jesus likely labored on the construction. The Greek word Jesus employed for hypocrites, hypokrites, meaning stage actor, may have come directly from what he witnessed at the Sepphoris Theater. And Caesarea Maritima, the Roman administrative headquarters on the coast, was the full embodiment of imperial power. An artificial harbor engineered with underwater concrete, hippodromes, temples to Caesar, streets laid in geometric precision. For a Jewish peasant who traveled there, the splendor was physical proof of his own exploitation. Every polished stone had been funded with someone's grain, someone's fish, someone's forced labor on a Roman road. The taxation system was not a background detail. It was a constant drain. Publicans, Jews employed by Rome, sat at customs points on every major road, rifling through baskets and bundles, deciding on the spot how much to seize. The system was built for corruption. The publican bought the right to collect and pocketed everything above the required sum. A fisherman on the Sea of Galilee paid tax before he could sell his catch. A farmer paid on his harvest, on his land, on his head. And the law of the mile turned humiliation into routine. Any Roman soldier could halt a Jewish civilian and lawfully compel him to carry military gear for 1,500 meters. A father could be reduced to a beast of burden in front of his own children. When Jesus said, "If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him too," the crowd grasped the specific fury he was addressing. He was not preaching passive submission. He was describing defiant generosity that reclaimed dignity from the grip of the oppressor. But beneath the taxation, beneath the religious tension, beneath the political powder keg, there was a slower, more persistent threat that modern readers almost never consider: the sheer physical squalor of urban life. The streets of Jerusalem were not clean. There was no municipal sanitation, no drainage system for residential quarters, no organized refuse collection. Animal dung piled up in the alleys and was trampled into a permanent layer of compacted filth. Household waste, bones, ashes, broken pottery, fish guts, spoiled food, was tossed into open pits at the edges of neighborhoods or simply left in the street for dogs, rats, and scavenging birds to pick over. The Kidron Valley running along Jerusalem's eastern wall served as a de facto sewer and dump. Blood from the temple sacrifices mixed with water from the rinsing of the altar courts flowed into channels that emptied into the valley. Butchers discarded offal nearby. Tanners, whose craft required soaking animal hides in vats of urine and lime, were banished to the outskirts of every town because the stench was unbearable. But the chemicals they used leached into the ground and polluted nearby water sources. The smell in the lower city during summer, when heat intensified everything, was dense enough to taste. Flies were constant and inescapable, crawling on food, on wounds, on the faces of sleeping children, on the meat in the market. Eye diseases transmitted by flies were so prevalent that blindness was a routine feature of village life, not a rare misfortune. Dysentery killed quietly and frequently. Parasitic infections from contaminated food and water depleted bodies over years. Skin ailments worsened in the heat. Wounds from labor, gashes from sickles, burns from ovens, crushed fingers from stonework became infected and sometimes deadly. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no grasp of how disease actually traveled. A contaminated cistern could sicken an entire neighborhood, and no one would understand why. Life expectancy hovered around 30 to 35 years, and infant mortality was staggering. Perhaps 1 in 3 children did not make it past age 5. The physical toll of living in this world, the dust in the lungs, the smoke in the eyes, the parasites in the gut, the ache in the joints from decades of labor on stone and soil, was permanent and cumulative. Bodies at 40 looked like bodies at 60 today. This was the world Jesus healed in. When the Gospels describe him restoring sight to the blind, making the lame walk, curing leprosy and fevers, they are not describing rare afflictions visited on unlucky individuals. They are describing the normal condition of the people. Healing was not a miracle performed in isolation. It was an intervention in a world where the body was under constant assault. Against this Roman machinery and this daily biological siege, the Jewish village had one institution that held everything together: the synagogue, not a cathedral. In most villages, simply the largest available room. But on the Sabbath, the whole community assembled there. The Torah scroll was unfurled and read aloud. A visiting teacher could be asked to stand, read, and then sit to explain. This is precisely the scene in Luke 4. Jesus stands in the Nazareth synagogue, reads from Isaiah, sits down and declares, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." Every eye was locked on him because that was how the room functioned: intimate, close, acoustically alive. The Sabbath itself was the one boundary even Rome could not easily breach. From Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, Jewish life halted. No work, no commerce, no travel beyond a Sabbath day's walk. It was the weekly act of resistance that proclaimed, "Whatever the empire demands, this day belongs to God." Beyond the walls lived the ones the gates were not built to shelter: lepers, the severely disabled, the ritually impure. They gathered near roads leading into towns, calling out warnings so no one would accidentally come close enough to contract impurity. Their garments were torn, their hair uncovered. Leviticus required them to cry, "Unclean! Unclean!" a verbal alarm that pushed the world away. They were the living dead, socially erased, physically banished. A leper lost not just health but family, community, identity, synagogue, marketplace, and any prospect of return. When Jesus reached out and touched a leper, he did not heal from a safe distance. He closed the gap, skin against skin. In a world where touch was governed by fear, he chose contact, and the contamination did not pass to him. It reversed. The leper was clean. The current flowed the wrong direction, and everyone watching knew the system had fractured. That world had an expiration date. In 66 AD, the tension erupted into open revolt. Rome's response was annihilation. Titus besieged Jerusalem, severing supply lines. The city that had smelled of spices and sacrifice began smelling of death. Josephus described starvation so extreme it defies comprehension. When the walls fell, fire consumed the rest. The temple, that massive, seemingly eternal structure, was engulfed in flames. Gold decorations melted and seeped between the stones. Soldiers tore apart the sanctuary block by block to extract the metal from the cracks. Not one stone was left upon another. Dig beneath the old city today, and you find the destruction layer. A black line of ash, charred wood, and Roman arrowheads, marking the precise moment that civilization ended. The Sadducees disappeared overnight. Their power base was smoke. The groups that endured were those not tied to the physical building, the Pharisees who carried their knowledge in text and memory, and the followers of the Way who understood that the true temple was never made of stone. The stones fell, but what was born in those alleys, in the smoke-filled workshops, in the reeking markets, in the synagogues where a carpenter's son stood up to read, in the touch that reversed the current of contamination that survived the fire. And it is still here. What surprised you most? The markets, the water, the filth, or the destruction? Share your answer in the comments. I read every single one.